TLDR, my family chose my younger brother over me during a critical moment, and I decided to walk away from them for good. Hey Reddit. I've been holding on to this for a while, and I think it's time to share my story. I'm 28, and I've always had a complicated relationship with my family. For context, I have one sibling, my younger brother, Jake, who is 24. We grew up pretty close, but as we got older, things started to shift, and I ended up feeling like the black sheep. Growing up, I was the responsible one. I was the one who always did my homework on time, helped with chores, and never got into trouble. My parents frequently praised me for being mature and dependable. I was often referred to as the little adult in the family, and I wore that title with pride. Jake, on the other hand, was the free spirit. He was charming, creative, and always had a group of friends around him. While I buried my head in books, Jake was busy drawing, playing guitar, or coming up with wild ideas for projects. My parents adored him for his creativity, often praising his artistic endeavors while I quietly cheered him on. I never minded that Jake was the favorite, until it started to affect our relationship. As we grew older, I began to notice the subtle differences in how we were treated. My parents would constantly compare us, often pointing out that Jake's creativity would lead him to great places while my practicality would lead me to a safe but boring life. I began to feel overshadowed, like I was living in the shadow of Jake's bright, flamboyant personality. Fast forward a few years. I had just graduated from college with a degree in business, and I landed a decent job in the city. I was excited to make my mark in the corporate world and hoped my parents would recognize my hard work. Meanwhile, Jake had dropped out of college to pursue a career in music, something that both thrilled and terrified my parents. They supported his dream, despite his lack of success. One night, my parents invited me over for dinner. I was looking forward to it, hoping for some family bonding time. When I arrived, however, the atmosphere was tense. Jake had just returned from a failed gig and was visibly upset. Instead of the typical family dinner conversation, my parents spent the entire evening comforting him. They barely acknowledged my achievements or asked about my job. I felt invisible. As the night progressed, I tried to steer the conversation to include my own experiences. So, I just had a meeting with my boss about a potential promotion, I mentioned casually. But my parents were too focused on Jake, asking him about his latest project and how he felt about his music career. It stung. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I attempted to express my feelings, saying, "I feel like you guys don't even notice my achievements anymore. I'm working hard too, and it would mean a lot if you recognize that." But instead of listening, my parents brushed my concerns aside, telling me I was being selfish and that I should support my brother. It hurt deeply to hear that my feelings were invalidated like that. A few weeks later, the situation escalated further. Jake called me one day, clearly distressed. He explained that he needed a loan to help fund his music career and asked if I could help him out. I wanted to support him, but I had just started paying off my student loans and couldn't afford it. I told him I couldn't help, and instead of understanding, he exploded. "Are you really going to let money get in the way of family?" he shouted. "You think you're so much better than me because you have a real job. I'm following my dreams, and you're just a failure with your boring desk job." His words hit like a ton of bricks. I had always been his cheerleader, but in that moment, he twisted my support into a weapon. When I went to my parents for support, hoping they would back me up, they surprisingly sided with Jake. They told me that I should have been more understanding and that pursuing a dream was more important than being practical. I felt utterly betrayed. It was like I was living in a nightmare, one where I was the villain in my own family story. In that moment, I realized they had chosen him over me time and time again. They saw me as the stable, responsible one who would always be fine, while Jake was the struggling artist who needed their help and attention. I was just the safety net that they could rely on when things went wrong. A few days later, I was still reeling from the confrontation. I decided to talk to my best friend, Mia, who had always been a good listener. Over coffee, I poured my heart out to her, explaining how I felt sidelined and rejected by my own family. "You need to think about what you want, not what they expect of you," she advised. "You've done everything right. It's okay to be angry." I felt validated by her words, but also scared. I had always been the one to maintain family ties, to keep the peace, and now I was being told it was okay to think of myself. That night, after reflecting on my situation, I made a decision. I would no longer be a part of a family that didn't appreciate me. I packed my things, loaded up my car, and moved out of the family home without telling anyone. I wanted to be free from their expectations and the constant comparison to Jake. The first few weeks after I moved out were a whirlwind. I found a small apartment near work, and while it wasn't much, it felt like my own little sanctuary. I dove headfirst into my job and started focusing on building my own life. I got promoted within a few months, and I made new friends who supported me for who I was, not who I was supposed to be. I also picked up some hobbies I had neglected, like painting and hiking. I spent my weekends exploring the outdoors, and I began to discover a sense of peace and fulfillment that I hadn't felt in years. But while I was thriving professionally and personally, I still felt a twinge of guilt about leaving my family behind. I wondered if I'd made the right choice, especially when the holidays rolled around. My parents always hosted big family gatherings, and I missed the comfort of those traditions. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had made the right decision for my mental health. "I'm sorry for how I treated you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't realize how much I had hurt you until you left. I felt lost, and I lashed out at the one person who was supposed to support me." I took a deep breath, allowing his words to sink in. "It's okay, Jake," I replied, though I wasn't sure if it really was. "But you have to understand that I felt abandoned. I worked hard for my accomplishments, and it hurt to see you get so much attention for your struggles." He nodded, and I could see the remorse in his eyes. "I get that now. I think I was so caught up in my own dreams that I forgot to appreciate what you were doing. I took you for granted." We continued to talk, and as the conversation unfolded, I felt a glimmer of hope. Jake was starting to understand my perspective, and it felt like a breakthrough. But I was still hesitant. I knew that trust would take time to rebuild. By the end of our conversation, I realized that while our relationship would never be the same, there was potential for growth. We agreed to take things slow. I wasn't ready to jump back into the family dynamic I had left behind, but I was open to building a new, healthier relationship with Jake. As for my parents, I told Jake that I needed more time before I was ready to face them again. He understood and promised to support me in that. Over the next few months, I kept in touch with Jake. We met for coffee occasionally and slowly began to rekindle our bond. It was a gradual process, but I could see positive changes in him. He was more supportive of my career, and I learned to appreciate his artistic journey without comparing it to mine. I still don't know if I will ever fully reconcile with my parents. I think it will take more time for them to understand the impact of their choices. But for now, I'm content with where I am. I've built a life that feels authentic to me, and while it's bittersweet to navigate family dynamics, I've learned the importance of self-worth and boundaries. For those of you in similar situations, I want to say, it's okay to prioritize yourself. It's painful to walk away from family, but sometimes it's necessary for your own well-being. I'm still healing, but I'm also thriving in a way I never thought possible. Update. A few months later, I received a message from Jake asking if we could talk again. I'm contemplating whether or not I should respond. I'm torn between wanting to reconnect and fearing it'll lead to more heartbreak. Any advice on how to handle this would be greatly appreciated. Thanks for reading, Reddit. I appreciate any thoughts or advice you have. Comments. You/supportive sister 21 *. Wow, that's a tough situation. It's commendable that you chose to put yourself first. If Jake reaches out again, maybe consider having an open conversation about how you felt. Healing starts with communication. You/just_a observer *. I'm proud of you for setting those boundaries. It's not easy, but it sounds like you're doing great. You/family drama 101 *. Sometimes families don't realize the damage they do. You've got to protect your peace. Do what feels right for you. You/music lover 45 *. I think it's great that Jake reached out. Maybe he's realizing he needs to make amends. Just be cautious and prioritize your feelings. You/moving on 31 *. You have to put yourself first. Family doesn't always mean unconditional love, unfortunately. Keep thriving.